Hello there, folks. I put together this painting tutorial of the beautiful lights and shadows in the harbor of Essaouira, Morocco. This video demo focuses mostly on mixing colors for lights and shadows, quickly blocking out large forms and shapes, and layering of color and textures. So by the way, I'll be teaching a gouache painting workshop in the Umbria region of Italy in June of 2005. We'd love to have you join us. So after you get done watching this video, there's a lot more information and images at the end of the tutorial. So I'm going to run through the entire process here from the basic layout in pencil all the way to the finished painting. One thing to remember though is that I've sped the video up twice the amount of speed that natural. It was 55 minutes. I've shortened it down to about 20. So this is the pencil layout. I don't get into a lot of details. What I do is basically block out the larger shapes and then kind of get them organized and arranged. So when I paint, I'm not painting individual objects, but I'm painting large shapes and large volumes. You might notice that I'm also not a slave to the absolute perspective and to the photograph. And what I do is I, once again, make sure everything works to scale, so everything's in proportion and the general perspective is correct. One important point I do pay attention to, though, is the planes. So when I paint the water and I paint the reflections, I have to make sure that they lay down on that flat surface. So generally what I start off with is the sky, mixing in those colors, no matter if it's cloudy or whatever, because the light from that sky will fall down on everything else in the composition. So I'm going to lay that out first, and you'll notice that later on that I end up mixing that as kind of my base. And then so I'll be putting other colors on the inside of it, like for the walls and the boats and just about everything else. So as I start painting things, doing my color mixing, I decide what I'll do is I'll show you what my palette is, so you maybe be able to keep track as you can watch my brush move from one color to another. So the basic layout goes from the whites to the warms to the cools and then to the earth colors at the end. Obviously your color choices will be different, but the reason I have this laid out like this is I can mix my complementaries and be able to get my color mixtures correct, so there'll be no confusion when I'm out plein air painting. So when we get back to painting here, you'll be able to see I'm going to mix in a little bit of that cadmium orange to that blue and sort of knock it down a little bit, that complementary color, and get into that shadow shape on that one side of the bridge. And when I mix the colors, I don't mix them absolutely. So you might even be able to see some of that, those nice cool blues kind of sneak into the oranges that are there. Again, that warm rock face that I'm painting. Now I'm just going to add a little bit more of the Linsum Crimson in for that more darker area that eventually I'm going to throw a warm bounce into. Now that I got my base sky and wall color, that shadowed area, I'm going to mix up that lit up part of the wall on that tower. And so I'm mixing in white and yellows, a little bit of orange. A lot of wet on wet technique you can see. That's one thing I like about gouache is that you can go from like really, really thick mixtures to like very, very fluid glazes. So now you see that I'm moving over from painting in those light areas, and I'm going to make up a mixture and get the other side of that tower wall. And as I put it together, I'm mixing back into that original sky color again because that light, that blue light is coming down and mixing with the warm color of the side of the tower. I am going pretty neutral with it though, just giving it sort of a, a mixture of warms and cools together, not really tilting it one way or the other. But now when I come into this other wall, this cast shadow is definitely a darker area, and I'm still playing up to that same thing using that darker sky color, but now mixing some burnt umber, burnt sienna into this to darken it up a little bit. Very wet on wet. You can see all these little colors are just kind of like swirling together as I lay them out. Very much shape painting. I know I'm going to be putting the textures over the top of it later. It's one thing I really like about gouache is you can do a basic layout painting and then mix your textures back in and even come over the top of it with colored pencil if you're going to do some mixed media in it. And neutralizing that warm color a little bit and then punching up the shadows that are coming off the bridge that are coming down and reflecting on the water. That's what I was talking about, keep making sure they keep that plane flat, because I have to make sure that those reflections and ripples go over the top of a flat surface as opposed to becoming a vertical jumble. One thing I haven't mentioned before is I have a lot of other videos that deal with water reflections and ripples and trees and different kinds of painting techniques. It's under Gary Draws and Paint. So if you get done and like this one, there's a ton more that you can reference to. So I brought up the reference photo here so you can see how when I'm painting in the water, it's very, even that's very shape oriented because I know this is basically an underpainting. Not to say that a lot of these effects are going to not show up in the later part of the painting, but what I am doing is I'm looking at the kind of zones of it, very much shape painting. So even when I come in here and paint these arches, you can see how clumsily I put them in at first. And now I'm mixing in that watercolor with burnt umber. And so what I'm doing, trying to get is a nice kind of vibrant dark in there. I don't want to make those tunnels black. I want to make sure that there's light flowing into them. My job at this point isn't to necessarily paint objects, it's to harmonize the entire painting. It's to look at the lights and darks, to look at the color choices that I make, to make sure that, as you can see with the water, it doesn't get too bright and cancel out the walls in the back that are also in shadow. I want to make sure that, like I said before, as I get this very harmonized and pulled together first, and before I worry about the recognizability of a lot of the objects in the painting. So as I go in and start to paint the boats, you see that I'll kind of, again, once again, mix up a pool of one central color and then work my cools off of it. So I mixed in some ultramarine blue and a little bit of linsome crimson. That'll cool it down a little bit. Put a little bit of peacock in there. It's a natural color of the boat. And so I'm very good about using these different pools, and like you can see the upper one was the walls and the tower. The one on the left is the water, and now what I'm doing is I'm keeping that blue color in there, those variations off of it. And I'm making very sure that they don't get polluted. But also keep in mind that all those boats are in shadow, so I can't let them get too saturated and too over the top at this point. Though I, once again, am keeping really careful idea of like what the shapes are in it. I want to make sure that those boats look architectural. They don't look blobby or they don't look soft. That I want to make sure I keep that edge control in there. Even though I am a lot of times with the more lost and found edges, sometimes the edges are really tight and sharp, and other times they're very, very fluid and then kind of washed together. Usually I play off the sharp edges where there's a color contrast or a value contrast. That way that edge keeps its singularity to it. Some of the other parts you can let it go a little bit more for atmospheric perspective or just the idea of grouping those objects together. Like as you can see right now, I'm throwing down that blue. That blue is, though it has a contrast, it doesn't have a super contrast and still has a little bit of that reference to the inside of the other boat. So once again, I'm going to try to harmonize it, look at all of the values and colors that are surrounding it from the walls and the water, and make sure that whatever colors I put down and values I put down aren't too jarring. That again, once it'll hold together as one composition. You might also notice that I edited a few of the boats out. Again, I want visual clarity in it. I don't want to necessarily copy everything I see in it. That would just be a lot of crazy making, and the fact that I'd have to get all those little tiny details in there. And I'm painting small enough already, and because so I don't want to have to struggle with trying to be absolutely positively representational as opposed to more impressionistic. As long as I get the idea that those are fishing boats in a harbor, I'm fine with that, and make sure that I'm making sure that those shadows areas are clear as well. That's a shape definition that I make sure that I get in there. Once I start to put details in there and a lot of rigging and a lot of the information, names on the boats, if I start to put that in too quick, I'm going to get trapped with that, and then I'm going to have to sort of reference that and repeat that all throughout the composition. And once again, this is sort of predicated on the idea that this is focused more on plein air painting. And so there is going to be a lot of like the idea of hinting at stuff. Like, again, once some knows that it's a boat and you get a little bit of rigging in one area or a little bit of information in another area, you'll be able to sort of extrapolate the bigger picture from that rather than having to worry about rendering in a bunch of useless information. because you feel you need to. Yes, that information is going to go into that, but once you get this all harmonized out, you'll be able to sort of pick and choose your targets later on in the painting. So you'll be able to bring out more focal points in it as opposed to just, like I said, replicating a lot of information that's not necessary. What I'm doing is I'm mixing, say, ultramarine blue or Prussian blue in with burnt sienna or burnt umber, which has got a red cast to it. It's like brownish red. And so what it does, a lot of times it knocks back that blue and gives it more of a nice, warmer, shadowed color to it. One thing I am paying special attention to is that I'm sort of rocking back and forth between the cools and the warms in the boats, but I'm also trying to keep the values not too jarring. They're all pretty close because again, they're in a shadowed area, so all those colors are a bit muted. Yes, I am saturating a lot of them out at this point, but at the same time, what I'm doing is you can see that sort of harder edge I'm putting in there right there is that I want to reintroduce a little bit of that blue. The main reason for it is that once again, this is like, to me, is like an underpainting. We're coming really close to that point where once again I can see the whole big general overall shape and size and harmonization of the entire painting, and then I can go back into it as I'm about to do here and juice up some of the colors. And you're about to see one of the reasons why I like gouache so much is that back part of that tower just didn't make me too happy. And so what I'm doing once again is I built up a much thicker base of a darker shadow color, and then I'm laying that in. I'm also going to, if you notice, I'm fixing some of the reflective light coming in, and especially that cast shadow that comes off the bridge onto the wall in front of the boats. The strokes really come out really clear in that, and a lot of times the mixing is wet on wet, a lot of marble icing too, so I'm not totally mixing in or mixing together all of the colors. I'm letting them kind of flow and sort of channel since it's a thicker paint. So now if you watch carefully, after I hit this little bit of reflection on the water, I made this pool of, looks like yellow ochre and a little bit of linsum crimson, and then I'm actually going to start to dry brush and pull a little bit of that early morning light into that tower and a little bit of that light hitting that textured stone. And so you can see that I'm pulling that up a little bit and sort of going right over the top of that initial painting that I made. And then for the real bright parts, I mix in a yellow and cadmium orange and then go back down into the water a little bit. Even getting a little bit of bounce off the little tunnels back there. Using that flat brush, paint real fast. Once again, trying to get the texture of the wall, but I don't want the texture to overrule the tower in general. Bringing in more sort of that saturated yellows into it. Quick painting. And again, you can see the colors on the palette. I go from a dark, and then I keep marching it down and using a little bit of the paint that I've used before. Once again, that hopefully harmonizes out all the colors as you move around the composition. You're not randomly just throwing colors all over the same color all over the place. What you're doing is that you are using it to help you guide your shadow colors and your light colors. Kind of pulls the whole object together since it's stone. Now I mixed in a ultramarine blue and a burnt umber. Makes a really nice dark black. I don't use black. I don't really. The only time I ever use black on a painting is if I'm painting something industrial, like car tires or something like that. Again, I'm bringing up those dark highlights, a little bit of the idea of an ambient shadow on the wall, those tunnel colors, and the reflections as well. So when I get the reflections, then I want to make sure that they're the same size of the object that it's coming off of. Yet it helps define the surface of the water. Here you can see I'm using that original pool color that's in the tunnel, and then mixing in some ultramarine blue with it, and then a little bit of violet, and then that coming right over the top of that with some pretty saturated blue right for the surface to get the secondary ripple pattern. And then even the reflections, you'll notice I'm painting vertically as opposed to trying to over texturalize the water. I just want to get the idea of that wall reflecting down on that pool, and then the texture will come more out with the sky reflection. So right now I'm about to paint in the warm reflections back up into the wall using, again, the colors that I already have, mixed in with a little bit of blue into it, a little bit of violet, knock it down a little bit, knock the values down, but still keep the warmth in it. And you'll see when we're about ready to do like a little tour of the underpainting here, so you'll be able to see that before I go over the top of it and put more textures into it. But I'm already starting to kind of lay the groundwork for that, as you can see, using that broad flat brush. And then there you can start to see the secondary colors into the marbleizing, where again, I'm not absolutely mixing all the paints together. It's pretty rough. That's good. I still have enough wiggle room to be able to pick in where all the details and the information is going to go, where the textures are going to be, and especially where the focal points will eventually show up. Now, an important organizing part here is I'm starting to put the ripples into the water, but I don't want to make it too active that I'm going to lose that calm sense of the morning. So as I put these in, as I lay them in, you can see a lot of transparency, a lot of different stroke size, but the strokes don't overwhelm the underpainting. That gives it its base. And then when I want to sort of push the foreground a little bit more, I'll use that ultramarine blue and the darker sky, and with a little bit of green turquoise, and then punch up that corner so it pops more into the foreground, even overlapping that reflective shadow that comes off the boat on the left-hand side. Okay, now it's time to punch in those boats. So I made a mixture of ultramarine blue, a little bit of green turquoise. I think there's some Prussian blue in there eventually as well. But I'm bringing the contrast up. I'm really starting to sort of break that edge control thing that I was talking about, or reinforce the edge control. Doesn't mean like outlining everything, but you can see I'm using the darks to like sort of heighten up where the shadows are. On the inside of the boat, you'll see that it'll be the shadows back underneath the wooden parts, underneath the place where you sit, a little bit of texture in the wood. Not too much though. I still want to keep the basic shape. I don't want to ruin the shape by cutting it into pieces. It's really pretty dangerous. If you end up outlining everything, it's all going to look like a cookie cutter as opposed to this unifying thing where, once again, I'm using that boat in the foreground as my informational tool. Like, if you get the idea what that is, hopefully what the viewer will do is will translate that information to the other objects in the back that you don't overpaint. That maybe you use it to sort of accent the bow of a boat or the back end of it, or maybe the idea of you'll see eventually that even the signage on it will get smaller in the background. That'll help the atmospheric perspective. Yeah, I'm really juggling that idea of like too much information, too much contrast. I don't want it to break apart, though I do like the rhythm of those open, more square pieces of the boats. So once again, I'll use that boat color, mix in a little bit of burnt umber with it, and then go into the shadowed areas. You can still see with those pools of colors that I have there. Like the one on the left is for the walls in the tower, and the one on the upper right is for the water, and the ones for the lower right is the boats. And I'm going back and forth between all these different colors to help pull the whole painting together. using a lot of complementary colors in it too. So at this point, it seems to be coming together and being fairly harmonized. So I'm going to start to work into more of the textural level of it. Again, sort of bump up the shadows a little bit more, bring the lighting back into it, into the boats a little, and then sort of prepare for the fact that now I'm going to start to add information, which is what I kind of consider details. Details are informations about what you're looking at, the surface form. See, I'm kind of knocking down that reflection a little bit more so it integrates with the ocean. Even using the same paint that I use on the side of the boat and then taking that up into the reflections up into the bridge. Also, an important thing to keep in mind is even though I'm painting using a photograph for reference in this thing, is that I'm using my memory of what actually standing in front of here and looking at the bounce light and the textures and keeping that in my memory bank from doing my plein air paintings on spot. And so the important part here is that I'm trying to get these textures of the stones in, but I have to keep the values about at the same level as the shadowed areas so they don't break away, literally break away from the surface of the paper. And I'm using a little bit of dry brush. I'm kind of turned over to a dagger brush here, which has a different kind of edge control to it. And so though it may look pretty dark at this moment, it's going to dry more into the paper, and I'll be putting some extra light bounce into it as well. So once again, we're coming to this part in the painting where I'm beginning to punch up, again, the details or sort of more of the accents in it. And this is also really dangerous because at this point you can let those little pieces of information overwhelm the painting. And so the eye will just start to pick up little spots of focal points and instead of, like I said before, of harmonizing the entire thing. So as I'm doing this, as I'm putting in the darks and the lights, which is what I'm doing, is I'm punching up more towards the ends of the values. I'm making sure that those values don't interrupt the bigger picture. So frequently you'll see I'll put a mark down and then I'll kind of quickly rush with my pinky over the top of it or my thumb to knock it back a little bit. There's those little cast shadows on the inside of the windows and a little bit more like the portals up there, little edges, little ledges as I'm putting this in with this dagger brush, even coarse shadows. So I'm putting in a coarse shadow in the edge of that building to pop it out. Since it's orange and it got the blue in back of it, there's more of a contrast. It's complementary colors, so it's going to sort of fire off a little bit more. So even these little dark areas I'm putting for ledges and little stones on the inside of it, I'm being really careful that I don't overdo the information and thus separate from the object that it's on. That's why I really pay attention to that base color that I put down, whether it's the lit part of the tower or the shadowed areas or the water, the basic water or the boats, is that I always refer back to that to make sure that the contrast doesn't become too jarring, whether it's too light or too dark. You can see that as I'm starting to really lay in this like darker parts, which is what I kind of like finish off paintings with. And now, so as I go into the boats, I'm really starting to bump them up a little bit more. I'm very much of a graphic painter, so I do enjoy my really laying in the shapes and making sure those are recognizable. I think as artists, we have to pay special attention to our strengths and our weaknesses and balance those out. And I'm constantly having that battle in my painting as well. So I think another important part that might come out at this point is I'm not using black for these like really dark areas. It's ultramarine blue or Prussian blue mixed in with burnt umber to give me those real dark. Sometimes I'll punch in a little bit of linsum crimson if I want to warm them up just a bit. But black to me, on like even using something like this, has a tendency to sort of separate away from the rest of the colors. And with gouache, it is really easy to mix up nice, juicy, dark colors. So at this point, that's what I'm doing is I'm using these darker colors to sort of delineate where edges of objects are. A little bit of texture. You can see I'm using a dry brush. I'll mix a color up and sometimes lay it on top of the cloth that's above me, and then drag the water out of it, and then put that over the top of it. It gives a really nice sort of weathered approach, especially for wood and such like objects like that. You can see it right there as I'm quickly running that brush over the top of stuff so it doesn't have a chance to really lay down a thick paint mixture. Again, I'm trying to use a value contrast rather than using outline. Don't want it to make it look like a coloring book. Like I said, it's always my balance between how much linear aspects you put in and how much value you put in. You can see as my color mixing, I'm going back and forth between the different pools of color now, warming some up, like on the inside of the boats, and then cooling down some other parts, like underneath the bridge. Now I'm starting to put in the rigging. And so I'm using, looks like an orange mixed in with a blue with a little bit of yellow in it to catch that light, that morning light that's coming in over the top of the bridge. It's sort of an ambient glow. And when the photograph comes up, you can see I'm not replicating all of it. Most of the time I use the rigging to either lead your eye over the top of an object or to explain the volume of it, the form of it. So you can see I'm using that draping rigging over the side of the boat, and then I'll come in and put an accent on it, and then a cat, so there it goes, and then a cat shadow back underneath that. Technically even putting stuff down that you don't see, but will make sense in relationship to the painting. And you can see the rigging I'm putting in has more of sort of a warm glow to it. I don't want it to necessarily bleed into the boat. Here's the signage. So most of the time when I put signage on things, it's just to hint at what's there. I don't want the viewer to necessarily try to read it. It's more sort of like I said before, sort of a scale thing. So the rhythm of it will pick your eye up and move it backwards through the composition. Hopefully reinforce some of the depth. There's those cast shadows over the top of that. Again, technically it's in the shadows, so there shouldn't be cast shadows coming off the objects. But if you just add enough of it where it's like shows a proximity close to the boat or just the edge of something, once again, it's ambient light. So that ambient light is going to be throwing a subtle light mixture down on top of the objects. So it'll be believable. So in these last part of this painting, what I'm attempting to do is use that, like I said before, that ambient light that's flowing in from the top of over that tower, and then bring that down on the top of the boats. So you're getting a warmish glow on the top of the seats or on the top of the outside railing of the boat. Sometimes bringing that saturation level up a little bit more just to pop the upper part of the boat towards the sky. That's where the sky color comes in again. Other times, like what I'm doing with the side of the boat right now, is knocking that down so it doesn't pop so much. Also introducing a little bit more of it, like I said, those little tinges of shadow or even the tinges of light. Kind of trying to unify the whole composition of this part. Like there's a little bounce light that comes off of the water back into the wall in the back of there. Again, that warm light will contrast a cool light and give it a little bit more of a punch. You can see I'm bringing some light into the top of there. Again, going towards the sky color, a sky light. Also using the rhythm of those seats in the back to move your eye back towards the wall in the back. Okay, now we come to the point where the painting's finished, and then you can look onto that toxic waste dump of a palette of mine, look at my brushes, and then we're going to do a little close-up tour through the painting so you'll be able to see the ambient light glow on top of the boats, the mixtures of warm and cool colors and the marbleization of paint in the walls, the original transparent wash on the water, and then the textural ripples over the top of it, dry brush marks, the simplicity of the boats and the rigging. And again, this is all predicated on the idea of plein air painting. And I have several painting tours, international painting tours that you can go to on YouTube and take a look at. They're underneath the channel Gary Draws and Paints. And then here's a reference and the painting next to each other. So thanks for watching the video. And as I said before, I have a YouTube channel, Gary Draws and Paints. There's lots of other tutorials and tours on it. And we are going to Italy next summer for a painting workshop. And so we're going to the Umbria region, which has Perugia and Assisi and Orvieto and several other towns we'll be going to paint. Here's some paintings from previous trips I've done. And then here's a video of the back of Orvieto, and it's so pretty. We'd love to have you join us on this trip, okay? As we transition here, there's more information about the workshop in Italy next summer. You can go to studio54boutique.com. The information's right there. And find out the itinerary, more information and such. And I put together a YouTube video of my last trip to Italy and Spain. So go on and take a look at it if you have a chance. And make sure that you subscribe to my channel and like this video and hopefully comment. And go to the other ones, take a look as well. Lots of tutorials and lots of painting trips from Kenya to China to Europe. Okay, so thank you very much. Bye.